Let me ask you here about who voted for him. Again, we're counting the votes along with the Senate here. But I know that Susan Collins, Republican of Maine, said that she was not going to vote here for the nominee to be the head of the EPA. Was there much Republican opposition besides from Senator Collins?
Well, not really. I think this story really was Susan Collins from Maine was really the only Republican that Democrats had a shot of getting, and they were destined to lose at least a couple of Democrats, as you mentioned, with Manchin. So the outcome was close, but it was never really in doubt.
Dean, what can you tell us about what the EPA is going to look like here under a Scott Pruitt? He's somebody who had filed suit when he was Attorney General of Oklahoma against the EPA. I imagine it'll be a smaller EPA. What's it going to look like regulatorily?
Well, it will probably be a smaller EPA, and the question is, will it be an EPA that gets less tax dollars? Because there's going to be a big effort here by Republicans and by President Trump to really sort of roll back the funding and, as you mentioned, the regulatory authority. A couple of the regulations that we'll be looking at are environmental rules that are really kind of top priorities for Democrats and for President Obama. And those have to do with regulating the carbon dioxide, the greenhouse gas emission from power plants, a water rule that had to do with the jurisdiction of EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers that sort of expanded their jurisdiction over certain waterways. Those are things that Congress really couldn't do much about with these rollbacks of regulations that you've probably been watching on the floor because they were finalized too early in the Obama administration. So they'll really require, if they want to roll those back, to have a Scott Pruitt in place at EPA, and he can begin to do some of that administrative work that would be required.
How big a reversal would that be if, in fact, we see an overturning of the Clean Power Plan or the waters of the U.S. rule there, Dean? What are we talking about here?
Well, the Clean Power Plan, the rollback of that would be very significant because that sort of anchors what the U.S. put on the table to underpin the Paris Agreement and its basic participation in that. That is really the biggest carbon regulation that the U.S. has. So that will send a signal to the utilities and the power industry that there's a relaxing of those requirements. But it will also send a signal internationally that the key sort of support that the U.S. has built for its policy for regulating greenhouse gas emissions is being withdrawn. So that's going to be very controversial. We see this as really the easy job, in a sense, was we'll be looking back at getting Pruitt confirmed. The tough work lies ahead.
Dean, it didn't take more than 10 seconds after this vote was tabulated for me to get an email from the National Resources Defense Council, a quote attributed here to the president of that organization saying, "We'll use every tool in the kit to stop him from harming our air and water." What do those who oppose his candidacy, his nomination for this job, and the kind of rollbacks we've been talking about, what do they have planned here for the next few months, indeed next few years?
Well, I think there was a couple of things. The things that we'll be watching for is really the push to get public sentiment behind environmental groups to sort of protect some of the environmental regulations that are in place. That's always an issue that they hope to push during the upcoming midterms and make it an issue in these cycles. We saw this during the Reagan administration, and we saw it during George W. Bush, as far as that issue really sort of rising in the minds of voters a bit. The other thing is the tools that they still have the courts, and we watch closely what Democrats can do on the floor. They still have 48 votes, so they can slow some things down, but it's really probably going to be in the courts.